Well, this morning I want to tell you a true story. A true story about a couple that I'm going to call Brad and Kim. I'm not going to use their real names. Kim came from a difficult background. Kim had a failed marriage. She had 2 children and a lot of hurt. But she met Brad. And with Brad, it was a new day. They had a daughter together. And life just turned around. Things were going great. All 3 of their children were involved in church, involved in worship, involved in youth, involved in different aspects of the church. Kim herself became a worship leader in our church. Brad also attended the church, professed faith in Jesus, and was there to help out in whatever was needed. He had a good job that paid good money, and he treated Kim's 2 kids as his own. He was a family man, and he was a good dad. It seemed like they had a fairy tale marriage, a fairy tale relationship. Everything seemed to be great. But behind the scenes, this fun-loving couple and their happy family had a dark secret. Brad was doing something that was destroying their marriage and destroying his family. The foundation of their marriage was being shaken by decisions that he was making, and something was about to be revealed that would devastate his entire family. You see, Brad was exchanging the real love and relationship of his wife, Kim, with something far lesser in value. Brad and Kim's story reminds me of another true story that we see in the Bible. It's a story about the young nation of Israel. A new day had also come for the nation of Israel. They were mere months out of their slavery into a newfound freedom as a brand new nation that had been delivered miraculously. You see, God had showed up for them in the midst of their slavery. In the midst of the nation of Egypt, God had showed up, and in no uncertain terms, He had delivered them. And not only had He delivered them, He had dismantled the powers and the authorities of the Egyptian gods. All the gods that the people of Egypt worshipped, systematically, God had revealed that they were nothing next to His power and His glory. And not only did the people of Israel escape slavery, but they escaped literally plundering the nation of Egypt. Egypt gave them their wealth and said, "Go, leave us alone." And they plundered the nation, and so they left with a large portion of Egypt's wealth. God had revealed Himself, had showed the people who He really was, that He was the God of their ancestors, of Abraham and of Isaac and of Jacob. And He called them to come into the desert to worship Him. He had delivered them through the Red Sea. He had destroyed Egypt's armies. He had provided a pillar of fire to guide them in the night and a cloud to guide them in the day. He gave them manna to eat every day, and when they were sick of manna, He gave them quail. He fed them with water from a rock to quench their thirst. He empowered them to even fight an army. This was a nation that did not know battle. And they were outnumbered and empowered, and God came and miraculously delivered them and enabled them to destroy the army that came against them. And now here they are at the foot of Mount Sinai. Moses had received the 10 Commandments, as well as other religious and national laws. And the people had confirmed their covenant with God. And after 400 years of slavery, God was present and was doing something amazing for the nation of Israel. Moses, their esteemed leader, was summoned by God to go up into the mountain and to meet with God. And he gave some instructions to the people, and then he disappeared up into the mountain. And the people waited. And they waited. And they waited. And they waited. For over a month, the people of Israel waited for Moses to return. And he didn't show up. And so we pick up the story in Exodus chapter 32. Exodus chapter 32. If you have your Bibles, turn with me there, and we're going to follow through in this story, starting at verse 1. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what's happened to him." Aaron answered them, "Take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing and bring them to me." So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, "Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord." So the next day the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. Afterward, they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. What in the name of the world would cause the people of Israel to do something so incredibly foolish? It makes no sense. I mean, does this seem like a terrible idea to you? Because to me, this seems like a terrible idea. In fact, they were just given the 10 Commandments. And one of the 10 Commandments was this: "You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath. You shall not bow down to them or worship." And they went and did it. It's a terrible idea. What they did here was awful. It was terrible because what happened, Israel, it wasn't so much that they made the calf, as what was happening was that they had traded the relationship with the one real God for a relationship with a golden statue. That's what I call trading down. That's definitely what I call trading down, big time. Israel was throwing out their real relationship with God for something far less. Far less. What would lead them to do such a thing? It makes no sense. They had taken from their newfound wealth the jewelry and the ornaments and all the things that they had plundered from Egypt, and they boiled it down and formed this golden calf, a thing that they could approach and touch and feel, a God possibly that they could control, a God that they created. They wanted something that was more tangible, more approachable, more mundane, because this God who called Moses up into the mountain, well, we don't know what's happened to Moses. He's been gone for well over a month. There's been no sign of him. Look at what God did to Egypt. He destroyed them. Maybe he's killed Moses too. Maybe he's destroyed Moses as well, and maybe we're next. We're too afraid of this God. We can't approach this God. We can't control this God. So let's make a God that we can control. Let's make a God that we can relate with and understand a little bit more. And then they fashioned the calf. And perhaps to make themselves feel a little bit better about their betrayal of what they'd just done to God, they gave this calf the same name as God. Aaron says, "Come, let us worship the Lord. This is the Lord who has delivered you out of Egypt." They gave it the same name. Maybe they thought if they pretended that this calf was actually God, then Yahweh himself wouldn't notice or wouldn't care. How do you think God's going to respond to this type of betrayal? Not well. Let's read in verses 7 to 10. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, because your people, whom you brought up out of Egypt, have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them, and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it, and have said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." I have seen these people, the Lord said to Moses, and they are stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone, so that my anger may burn against them, and that I may destroy them, and then I will make you into a great nation. God disowns them. He sees what they've done, and he disowns them. He tells Moses, "These are your people." Notice, they're no longer his people. These are your people. These are your people, Moses. This is your problem. And then he tells Moses that I'm going to destroy them. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to destroy them, and I'm going to start over with you, Moses. Forget these people. Does this seem a little extreme? Yeah, it's incredibly extreme. That God would decide to wipe them all out over what they have done, because idolatry is extreme. Idolatry destroys. The very nature of idolatry is an exchange of the truth of God for something far less. We see that as the people begin to worship this false idol, this calf image, which was probably a throwback to one of the Egyptian gods. The atmosphere in the camp becomes raucous. A strange spirit seems to take grip of the people as they gather to worship this calf. And it turns from a worship service into more of a hedonistic party. And in fact, when Moses comes down to see what was happening, this is what he says. He said, Moses saw that the people were running wild, and that Aaron had let them get out of control, and so become a laughingstock to their enemies. They were basically making fools of themselves by the way they were acting. Idolatry destroys. Why does it destroy? Because it is sin. And sin destroys. Sin always destroys. See, one night, after youth night, Kim comes into my office to reveal something that she had recently discovered. And you could see the weight of it on her. Brad had gotten heavily into pornography. And Kim had found out, and she was devastated. Because he wasn't just dabbling in it. He was up to his eyeballs. He had potentially and essentially traded in his real relationship with Kim and with his children for something much less. Now I'm sure when he first saw that first image that he had no intention to go as deep and as far as he did. See, that's the lure of sin. Before he knew it, it was destroying his marriage, and it was destroying him. And it got to the point that he turned to the porn instead of to his wife. And it was destroying him. So Moses, seeing what had happened, knowing the danger that the people of Israel were in, he stands in for them before God. And we read in verse 11, this is what happens. But Moses sought the favor of the Lord his God. "O Lord," he said, "why should your anger burn against your people, whom you brought out of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say it was with evil intent that he brought them out, to kill them in the mountains and to wipe them off the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce anger, relent, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by your own self, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land I promised them, and it will be their inheritance forever." Then the Lord relented and did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened. You see, Moses appealed to God's promise and to his covenant. He appealed to God's grace and his mercy. And in effect, he went before God and the people, stood in the gap for them, and God relented. However, there was still the problem of sin that the people had committed. They had broken God's law, and because they had broken God's law, death was the penalty. And despite Moses' intercession, the people were still in danger. They were still facing death. They were still in the midst of their idol worship and their sin. And we see when Moses approached the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, his anger burned. And he threw the tablets out of his hands. The tablets that God had written the law on. He threw it out of his hands, breaking them to pieces at the foot of the mountain. And he took the calf they had made and burned it with fire. Then he ground it to powder, scattered it on the water, and made the Israelites drink it. Moses responded in a very extreme way as well when he saw what was happening. He slammed the tablets down, smashing them. And you can almost picture as he comes down and sees what's happening to get people's attention, he slams these tablets down and they smash. He literally breaks the law that God had written because the people had broken God's law. And then he goes and he grabs the calf, throws it into the fire. Now, I mean, we know throwing this calf that's formed into the fire is not going to do much to it other than melt it a little bit. And he takes out whatever chunk was remaining and he smashes it up into little tiny pieces, grounds it into dust, pours it in water, and then forces the people to drink it. Literally drinking into themselves the sin that they had committed. Showing them, this is on you. This is in you. This sin that you have done, it's in you now. And then he questions Aaron about what had happened. And you can read about it here, but basically Aaron comes up with some lame excuse about how the idol just kind of came out of the fire. We just threw our jewelry in it. This is what came out. Wow, it's amazing. Do you see the problem? The people still had no idea the danger they were in. They had no idea the sin that they had committed. They were completely oblivious to what they were doing and what was happening. But Moses understood the danger that the people were in and the destruction that was coming, because idolatry destroys. And it was only God's mercy that had allowed them to live this long. And we continue to read in verse 26. So he stood at the entrance to the camp and he said, "Whoever is for the Lord, come to me." And all the Levites rallied to him. Then he said to them, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Each man strap a sword to his side. Go back and forth through the camp from one end to the other, each killing his brother and friend and neighbor." And the Levites did as Moses commanded. And that day about 3,000 of the people died. And then Moses said, "You have been set apart to the Lord today, for you were against your own sons and brothers, and he has blessed you this day." Moses, along with the help of the Levites, began to put the unrepentant revelers to death. The sin and the rebellion of the people could not be tolerated. God's judgment would come, and the people's idolatry would destroy the works of it. You see, God takes sin very seriously. He has to, because he's holy. And the penalty for sin is death. So do you see the people are the problem for the people of Israel? If their idolatry destroys them, how can they be saved? If our idolatry destroys us and our sin destroys us, how can we be saved? Did Moses' intercession and willingness to put so many to death work in saving them? The answer is in verse 34. God says, now go, lead the people to the place I spoke of, and my angel will go before you. However, when the time comes for me to punish, I will punish them for their sin. And the Lord struck the people with a plague because of what they did with the calf Aaron had made. Moses' intercession and Moses' extreme action didn't save them. It just delayed judgment a little bit. You see, the reality is idolaters don't stand a chance. God's judgment still remained on the people. So how could they be saved? We see in Exodus 33, in verse 3, God says, go up to the land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go with you, because you are stiff-necked people, and I might destroy you along the way. When the people heard these distressing words, they began to mourn, and no one put on any ornaments. It's interesting that they take their jewelry at the beginning and they use it to create this false idol. And then the jewelry that's left at the end, they said, no, we're not going to make the same mistake again. We are truly sorry about what we've done. God had to punish their sin. Yet, in His mercy, He accepts their broken and their contrite hearts. And He stays true to the promise that He made to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob to lead them. However, the debt for the sin has not been taken care of. As we can see by the way that God speaks to the people. There's still a problem. There's still an issue. There's still this rift and this wedge between us. The destruction caused by their idolatry and their sin would still have to be repaired. Because sin destroys us. Thankfully, we know further in the story that God saves us. Remember the stone tablets that Moses smashes at the foot of the mountain? Well, God makes more. God makes more. And they end up in the temple, in the center place of worship. And as the people would come into the temple, these tablets were at the center of their worship. But we actually see these tablets again. In Hebrews chapter 9, verse 15, we see the tablets in chapter 9 in the context of Jesus entering the most holy place. And in verse 15 we read this: He offers Himself as a ransom to set people free from the sins committed under the first covenant. You see, Jesus comes and brings deliverance. In Jesus, we find the one who will go to God on our behalf. He will stand before Him as one who has not followed idols, as one who has taken upon Himself the destruction of our sins so that we can be saved. Idolatry is a strange thing for us to talk about today. And probably as I've been talking about it, you think, well, we don't bow down and worship golden calves. We don't bow down and worship golden idols. We don't sacrifice and offer sacrifices and offerings to images of gold or stone. We tend to think of idolatry as something that is long since removed from our society. But idolatry is not about a golden statue. Idolatry is about trading down. The people of Israel were turning away from God and replacing a real relationship with Him for something far less. And that's what happened in Brad's relationship with Kim. Brad had exchanged a real relationship with his wife for a false relationship with images of false people. He had traded down, and it cost him his marriage because he refused to deal with the problem. He refused to admit it was even a problem. He refused to turn back to Kim. He was living for the idol and not the real relationship, and it destroyed their marriage. And you may be looking at this story and thinking those Israelites were fools. Who would trade the real God for something like a golden calf? But don't think that it's just the people of Israel who could do something so foolish. There will always be something in our own lives that seems to garner our worship in God. What is your idolatry? We all have things in our lives that we're tempted toward exchanging or putting in place of God, giving greater importance than what they're really worth. Think about the bank executives and the CEOs that took their lives in 2008. When the stock markets crashed, dozens committed suicide that year. What would lead successful, wealthy, and educated people to do such a thing? They had traded a relationship with God for a relationship with money or power. And when their idol God let them down, they felt there was nothing left to live for. In my own life, there's times that I exchange my relationship with God for a relationship with doing good deeds or doing the right things. There's times I elevate my devotional life, my personal study, my giftings, and they become idols to me. Is there something in your life that you've exchanged for God? Something that requires your sacrifice, your attention, your allegiance. It could be anything. Anything that we use that quiets God's voice as we elevate that thing. Don't be fooled. Sin destroys us. But God saves us. God saves us. In 2006, Kyle McDonald, a 20-something from Montreal, had a red paperclip. That's what he started with. And through a series of 14 trades, along with some assistance from radio and internet buzz, Kyle managed to trade up from a red paperclip to a 2-story farmhouse in Saskatchewan. Now that's what I call trading up. Starting with a paperclip and ended up with a house. True story. You can check it out. There's news reports about it all over the internet. And the reality is, church, all we bring to the table is a red paperclip. That's all we really have to offer God. At best, a red paperclip. And sometimes we're even guilty of worshiping that instead of God. But you see, God has traded up for us. We don't have Moses to intercede for us. We have Jesus to intercede for us. God traded up for Jesus. We have someone far greater. We don't have Moses to offer himself on our behalf. We have someone far greater than Moses to offer himself on our behalf. God has traded up on our behalf, and we get Jesus. He takes our paperclip and gives us Jesus and everything that he has done. In light of that, our part is simple. We acknowledge our idolatry. We acknowledge our sin. We acknowledge the ways in which we turn from God, and we repent. And we say, God, you would take this paperclip of mine and give me Jesus. Because that's the only thing that can save. That is the only thing that can save. That's trading up. I want to ask the worship team to come back. Now this morning, I don't want to embarrass anybody about trying to say this idolatry or that idolatry. But we all know the things in our lives that steer us from God. The things in our lives that tempt us to turn from Him. What I want us to do this morning is, as we worship, just for a couple of moments, I want us to stand together and say, God, I give you the idols, The little that I have to offer, it's not worth anything. But I want Jesus. And you may have been following Christ for 30, 40, 50 years. But still in our hearts, there's times that these idols pull us away, keep tugging at us. And we need to resolve again and again, turn back to Christ, to cling to Him. Pierce had asked in 2015, what is it that you would love to see God do? And my prayer is always that I would know Jesus more, that I would follow Him more nearly, that I understand His voice and hear Him more clearly. We need, more than anything, Jesus Christ and Him alone in our lives. Let's stand together.